Hello everybody, this is a GrogHeads.com video review of the game Advanced Platoon Leader. This is a game by H&S Games, which stands for Hexes and Soldiers, I believe. And this is the first game of theirs that I've ever looked at. I've never seen one of their titles before, and as far as I knew, this was the first one they'd ever created. Well, that's ignorance on my part. I went and looked up their site and saw they have several different games, including one called Platoon Leader, and several expansions for it. So this is apparently a building on that particular system, and it makes it a little more, well, I want to say I've seen perhaps this is a little more complicated, but also very easy to learn as well. And we're going to get into some details on this and show you how this game works and give you some of my thoughts on it. But first, I want to talk about the components. Now, as a print and play title, which this is, you're responsible for creating that stuff, so it's on you to decide what kind of components you want. Now, I've never once done a print and play title. This is my first one, first H&S game, as I said, my first ever print and play, so I really wasn't sure what to do or what to expect. Now, there's tons of stuff out there, single-handed warfare. Derek, he's got his own video that is very good. I did not see that video until after I had made my own attempt at mounting this stuff. So what I created is not probably the best quality, but and for my purposes for the game itself, I think it went pretty well. The first thing are the map cards, which come on sheets of 3 each with a backing. The material that I used is kind of a matte paper, and it's extremely flexible, almost like a playing card, but that's because there's 2 sheets here together. You can probably see the edge there pretty well. What I used was, like I said, that matte paper. I printed them on there. As I said, 3 to the sheet. I'm going to show you real quick what that looks like when you have the sheet in front of you. It's kind of like this with two sides of the page on one sheet of paper, and print it out, cut it out, and then what I used to glue them together was basically simple glue sticks. So that actually worked really well. I just pushed the 2 together, and then I kind of looked at it and did my best to trim it, although you could see that there's a little bit of a white edge to some of these, so it's not the best job in the world, but it worked for this, I think. And these are nice and, I think, good quality map tiles. So as you can see from the map tiles, there's 12 squares to each one. I think I'm holding that upside down actually, and that's for regulation of movement and fire, and also for placement, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Then you can see there's a wide variety of them. You've got some with buildings, a stone building, or excuse me, a wooden building, which is brown, a stone building, which is gray, and then this happens to be a church in this case because you've got the graveyards as well here. There's a forest one too, but this is a little confusing to me. It's my understanding from the rules that this space and this space are woods, as well as these 4. From just the first glance, it looks like these 4 are just woods, and these are very much like, say, one of these, which come as clear. Or perhaps, no, that's a river. Let me see if I can find a clear one here real quick. Here we go. Or like something like this with just a little clump. That's kind of what that looks like. I mean, granted, there's a little bit more to it, but it's my understanding that that is the case. These are all woods squares for this. So that was a little confusing, but I was able to figure that out through the rules. There's some with roads. Let's see what else we got here. There's orchards with various trees, obviously. We've got more roads, some clear, some wheat fields, which is really cool. More woods, more orchards, and then there's some hills. You can see the elevation. There we go. I'll get it right sooner or later. That this hill stands up above the terrain around it, so it's very simple. There's only or actually 2 levels, I should say. This ground level, and then 1 level up, and that's only, of course, if these appear in a scenario. Whoops. And that's pretty much it, I think. You got sideways roads there, of course. And you got some that have more clusters of buildings to show villages and such. So depending on the scenario, depends on the setup of the cards, and generally it's done in a 3x4 format. If I did one really quick here, I can show you what one would look like. Get that out of the way a little bit there. So let's see here. Dun, 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 dun. I know that's not right because there would be river there, but you know, you kind of get the idea. I'm just kind of throwing these together to show you. I'll give you a little bit of sense of scale for the game. One, and let's do a couple of orchards here. Why not? So this is the basic layout for a game. As I said, it's 3x4, and usually it depends on the scenario. Usually the Americans will come in from this side here, and as they do, they activate, or you check for activation of German units assigned to that scenario. So let's look at the game tracks. They're on the same backing as these as well. They came in the same way as the map tiles, 3 to a sheet. We've got stat cards, which are used to keep track of platoons. These are each for squads, squad 1, squad 2, and squad 3. This is for a leader. The question mark indicates whether or not this particular unit's been spotted on the map. This plus sign is actually should be like a red cross. It's for indicating if the leader is wounded. Then the total number, I should say, of action points is stored here. It's a pool by which all squads in the platoon can draw to do things during a turn. And then down here, these 3 blanks will hold the strength of each squad. They start at a certain strength at the beginning of the game. That strength is printed on the tile, or I should say the game piece, and you make note of it here as well. So as it takes hits, it takes losses, and that directly affects its firepower. So you have cards for the Americans. As you can see, the design is an American star, and you can also see here, this is a German cross. I forget the exact name of it. It's mentioned in the rulebook, though. Let's see what else. We have a VP track, which, of course, tracks victory points. There are markers provided to keep track of that. We've got a turn weather record track. This is the turn track up here, which kind of starts from here and goes this way and across. I wish there had been some kind of numbering, perhaps, to help keep track of that, because at the beginning of every scenario, you actually roll a die to determine how far along the game turn marker goes. So it's not always the same amount of time. Sometimes it can start here, sometimes it can start here. It just depends. And then down here you've got the weather, which is clear, overcast, fog, rain, and snow. Usually a game will only start in clear, overcast, or possibly fog, depending on the weather roll that you make at the start of the turn or start of the game. Rain usually only happens as a result of overcast skies, and snow only happens if the scenario calls for it. So you won't have to worry about that. But it's interesting that there's different types of weather represented. There's some more stat cards, and I think that's all of them. Yep, that's it. So those are all the record-keeping tracks. So let's look at some of the counters now. These are 3 pages, and what I did was I created them, or printed them on a sheet of a full-page shipping label, I should say. This is not all of them. This is just a sampling of them. And I kind of screwed up on them, actually. So what I did was I printed them, as I said, on a full-sized shipping label, and then I used, for backing, a Lego box. So I've had this Lego box for a while. Don't know why I kept a hold of it. But as you can see, it's pretty decent. I mean, it's not too thick. It's not thick like a cardboard shipping box, which I think is a little too much. There are people, of course, that'll probably look at that and laugh or have better ideas as to how these should be mounted, but this is the best way it worked for me. And as you can tell, I kind of screwed up. On some of them, I put the sticker side on the label side, I should say, on this side like this. And then on a couple of them, or on one of them actually, I accidentally put the label on the opposite side. So when I cut them, I had a backdrop of the Lego box. So that's great. Which kind of sucks, but that's my own screw up, so it's not too big of a deal. Now to show you the counters, here we have a, let's see if I can get that lined up. Here we go. This is American Leader, and you can see in the upper left corner is a number. That's his platoon. The upper right corner is his rank, and then the number below it is his DRM modifier. The lower left corner is his inherent strength. The middle number is his range, and the right hand bottom number is his morale. So that's the American leader. And generally, well, actually, they're both the same, whether they're German or American leaders. Let me see if I can find a German leader here. If I happen to grab one. Yeah, there we go. So the German, if I can get focused on there. There we go. The German is kind of the same, as you can tell. Now, what I did when I said I backed them onto cardboard, I then scissor cut them. As you can tell, I kind of did a sloppy job on some of these. I rounded out the edges too. I know at least one guy that's probably going to have a heart attack just looking at that, but I couldn't help it because they were rounded, and I didn't want to have to try to round them on a pair of scissors, so I just kind of cut them sharply on the edges. So let's look at some of the military units now. Here's an American squad, and the upper left corner are two numbers, 1 and 2. That is the platoon number and squad number, I believe. So he comes from 1st platoon, he's 2nd squad. The lower left number, the 4, is his inherent strength, which is a number of d6 dice that you roll in combat. The number 6 is his range, and the 7 is his morale. So the morale is either 6, 7, or 8. 6 is considered green, 7 is vet, and 8 is elite. The range is the number of squares, of course, that it can fire, and the 4, as I said, is the number of d6 dice that you throw. Now, one thing I got to say about these counters, they're kind of, in a bad light, let's say, they're difficult to tell the difference. And that's not working. I can't hold two of them together, and I can't even pick them up. So, as you can see, you can probably tell from the video, there's a big difference. This one's green, this one's gray. Sure, I get that, but some of them, at first glance, can I find an American? There we go. If you look at them from a distance, it might be a little bit harder for you to tell, although this certainly looks lighter. Up closer, you can obviously tell that the one on the left is green, and this one's green, this one's gray. In a bad light, though, if you play in a bad light, which you shouldn't be doing anyway for your eyesight, save your eyes, it's hard to tell with me, so that's another design. Now, before you say, well, it could have been your printer, well, it really wasn't, because I got a brand new Epson wireless printer, and this was the first thing I ever printed on it, so I'm not sure if it was the colors that just washed out because of the printer or what, but these are the result. It's hard to tell, with me anyway, from a distance. Up close, it's simple enough. Your mileage may vary on that. And we also have various different counters for marking. Here's a smoke marker. The dot indicates longevity. I believe there's some in here that are, yeah, here we go. There's a smoke marker with 2, so it indicates it had just been freshly placed. There's red, and there's some gray ones as well. Here we go. These are thrown into a cup and drawn to determine placement, usually of German units. There's facing arrows, which you can use in optional rules, I think it is. Personally, I don't like the facing rule, optional rules. I prefer to have these guys sitting on a map with perhaps facing in all directions without an actual facing, but there is an optional rule that allows you to do that. And you can then say, place an arrow on top of them to indicate which direction the guy's facing if you want to do that. But I never really kind of like that, so. But it's up to you, of course. Let's see what else we have here. I think that's pretty much it. Here's a fire marker, which is used when a demolition charge or a mortar hits a wooden building. It can possibly catch on fire and really ruin people's days if they're in that. And we have some hit markers here as well. I forget exactly what those are used for, but I'll get into it as I get into the review. I believe that these markers indicate if a unit is hit, then other fire made against that unit are done at a die roll modifier. So these actually can really cause a unit to get hurt even worse. And that is it pretty much. There's other markers, there's other things to talk about, but you kind of got the gist of it. The components overall, I think, are good. The map tiles, I like the design on them, except for this particular one. As I said, it's a little confusing, but it's not that big of a deal. The artwork on some of them are really cool. I like the village, and I really like the wheat field for some strange reason. This is kind of neat. The counters themselves, as I said, the design is a little odd that the colors are so close together, but it is what it is. I can live with it. I can play with it. It's not that big a deal. I have done so, but still, I wish that there's maybe a little bit more of a difference between the Germans and the Americans design-wise. Other than that, like I said, these are really good too, but this is another thing. Just at first glance, it's hard to tell. They're kind of close in color. You can tell the design, obviously. This is American, this is German, but again, it would have been nice to have a design that's maybe a little bit more different so that I can tell at an immediate glance which is which. I'm an old man. I don't want to have to stare at stuff too long. So now let me talk a little bit about the rulebook. This rulebook was written, of course, by the gentleman who created the game. It was all done pretty much in-house by one person. Anything done by a one-man show, technically, I mean, you got to give them some leeway when it comes to design work. Obviously, you got a print and play game. That's a cheap way to get things out. It's the easiest way to get it out, to get it into people's hands, to get them to produce it the way they want, and give them a satisfying experience too, because some people actually enjoy it. And after having gone through this process, I can see that. I kind of like being able to put a game together myself. It was a neat experience, so there's that. The rulebook is another story. I'm not going to be at all mean about this, so I hope it's not taken that way, but the rulebook leaves something to be desired. And that's me talking as a technical writer. I've been a technical writer for almost 20 years, instructional designer mostly, but I've used a lot of technical writing in my work. So when I see a rulebook, and this is another thing that gets me too, because maybe I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I've also written a lot of books, or manuals I should say, for PC games and board games. I have in my head what I know works. I was able to do it for years. It's not something I wanted to make a career out of, so I didn't do it for very long, but for maybe 3 years I did it. So I know in my head what works. I know what people like. This is a decent enough manual, but there are a lot of misspellings in it. There's some sentence run-ons. There's some other kind of grammatical issues. Nothing major. Now, some people, they don't care about that kind of thing. Absolutely fine. I'm not calling this out to be a jerk or anything like that. I'm just saying this really looks like it didn't get proofread too well. Now, there's also some things such as the use of the word route, R-O-U-T-E, instead of the word route, R-O-U-T. Route with an E, of course, is a road, while R-O-U-T is the designation of a unit that, say, in a game breaks due to a morale failure or something else. That's what the game is intending to talk about, and that's something that really kind of bugged me as I read it. It's not correct spelling. Now, here we go. Here's routing. You might be able to see the unit must route, R-O-U-T-E, or routes, R-O-U-T-E-S. Again, not a big deal, but for somebody who has been in the military, somebody who has played war games for years, whatever your background is, that would bug you, and it kind of bugs me a little bit. So there's that. But, you know, it is what it is. It's not that big of a deal. Another thing about the manual that I had a hard time with is I would remember reading something, and then I couldn't remember where it was. So the thing that bugs me mostly about that is there's a kind of a sequence of play in section 4, but there's no real overall sequence of play. This sequence of play just covers how things are done. It doesn't tell you, step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. This manual talks in a very conversational way, and some people who are in wargaming might not appreciate that. So take that as you will. The first part of it is talking about the game pieces, the terrain pieces and such, and then it goes into how how the sequence of play works and such. So that's great, but there's actually no setup instructions either. The scenarios do go into it, but it's not extremely clear what needs to be done. So I found myself constantly flip going through this. A suggestion I would have, if you get this game, I would suggest leaving the rulebook on, say, an iPad or some other kind of tablet. It'd be a lot easier to scroll through it than having to flip constantly. Overall, it took me a few tries to get through these rules to be able to play the game. Again, not a big deal. I'm somebody who's come from old school gaming, who read Avalon Hill games, who, you know, we're talking law degree type. You need a law degree basically to play those games, to read through 3 columns of teeny tiny print and understand the concepts it was trying to give you. This game is a very cool game. The manual just doesn't communicate it too well, and that's a real shame, I should say. I wish it had been maybe professionally proofread. Again, I understand this is a one-man operation. Those are expensive people, man. Trust me. I know my technical writing brothers and sisters out there. They charge a lot for that kind of thing. So I think that it could have done with another pass or two, but otherwise it does its job well enough to impart the instructions of the game. Now, I couldn't have given you an honest review without talking about this at a little bit of length. So now that I've done that, let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how the game plays. I might have mentioned the VP track previously. You've got a couple of markers that you can use to mark the German 10s and 1s and the American counters to mark the American 10s and 1s as well. You've got these little, what look like Major League Baseball counters, which are kind of cool. The company's logo is kind of in a similar design. I think you can see this way over here. You've got one marker for the weather for the scenario. We'll put it clear, I think it is. It doesn't matter, but you just put the marker on where it is. An interesting thing to note, I should say, about the weather, as I said, it's clear, overcast, fog, rain, and snow. Snow only appears if the scenario says it does. Rain only appears if it's been overcast for at least a turn. There's a certain roll you make to see if it starts raining. Fog, I believe, is another one that's specified by the scenario. So we'll just set it on clear. All of this affects how units are spotted. Again, something I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, it does, each turn, I should say each scenario, has a default start time, which usually, and in most games, it starts on turn 1. So in this track, it starts here, and it goes this way, and then this way, and ends on this square. But there's a chance at the end of every game that there might be an additional turn. So you roll for that. That's kind of cool. I like how that variable exists and how it makes the game possibly longer. But the thing that really gets me is at the beginning of each turn, you roll a die to see how far along on the track this marker goes. It can go upwards of 3 squares. Now, it's not very clear, and this is one of my pet peeves about the manual. It doesn't really say, it just says roll, and if you roll a 1 or a 2, you move it 1 square along, 2 or 3 or 4, 2 squares along, 5 or 6, 3 squares along. So I don't know if that means it just by default starts here on turn 1, and then if you roll a 1 or 2, you move it 1, or if it's 1 or 2, you set it here, 3, 4. You see what I'm saying? So that's not very clear to me. Since I rolled a 5, I'm just going to play it by this rule. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So according to this, we're already 3 turns into this game. And this really kind of drives a sense of urgency in the game. If you're especially having an objective where you have to get your American units off the northern map edge, man, this is really limiting. This is really going to push you to move your units recklessly almost to try to get to your objectives. Even the first scenario is a little tough. Your units come in from the bottom, and I want to say it's this square here. There's a stone church in this square that has a couple of German units in it, and you have to take that or not a church, I'm sorry, it's a manor actually. You have to take it in order to win the scenario. So you've got a road that goes up the middle, and you have a choice to make. You can either charge up that road and probably come under immediate fire because there's a medium machine gun that the Germans have, or you can come up this way, and in that scenario there's some trees here, so you can have your line of sight blocked, or have their line of sight blocked, so you can get a lot closer before you start engaging them, or maybe do a combination of both. I don't know. The game, it has so many possibilities, and this here really kind of limits it, because if you're already 3 turns along and you need to move your butt off the top of the map, you're going to be booking it trying to get up there, and you're going to be spending a lot of your action points on movement while the Germans are just mowing you down. So that's part of the challenge, though, I suppose. It can be frustrating at times. Now, I did talk about the stat cards in the components portion. You have 1 for each platoon. So in this particular case, I just set up a couple of squads and a leader, and a couple of squads and a leader, so 2 different platoons. Now, in a setup, when you have your units on the map, or even before they come on the map, you set their strength points. So in this case, I'll show you this really quick here. We've got squad 1 of the first platoon, and you see that number in the lower left corner is its strength, which is 6. So we take a die with a 6, and mark the card. And the same with the second squad, which for some reason where did I put him? Oh, he's over here. I don't know why, but I just happened to do it that way. We've got another 6. So for me too, I just put a blank, or just any counter really. I think, actually I talked about this in the components. This is an optional rule, so if you don't use that rule, you can just flip it over. And I do that to mark that there's no third squad here. It makes it easier for me. Your mileage may vary. So once we've done that, we've got the strength points here, and these are reduced through combat. Once the number is reduced below 1, the squad's eliminated. Simple as that, which is nice. Nice clean thing. Nice easy way of recording things, as long as you have enough dice. But then again, what gamer doesn't have enough dice? For myself, I have 2 old sets of Axis and Allies that I cannibalize these from, so I'm pretty good with that. I've got tons of other games that I can use for dice. Mirth, shut up. It's just a matter of you finding stuff that you need to play this game with. Again, it's a print and play, so it doesn't come with dice. So there you go. Anyway, so the game revolves around action points, really. Your actions, actually both sides, both the Americans and the Germans, spend action points to do things. And they're summarized on a quick reference sheet that comes with the game. It tells you exactly how many action points you can spend to get movement points, how you can spend them to rally, to conduct fire, either at full firepower or half firepower, advancing. Everything is on this sheet, so it's all nicely summarized, which is a great touch, and I appreciate this a great deal. So to get those action points, though, it's a little confusing. The videos I saw were probably older or in an earlier stage of development, and it said, I think that, I saw somewhere, I think, I could be wrong, that each squad gets 1 default action. But now you do not. So that's the point. That's why I was a little confused. The thing is, when you've got, as I said, when you've got a variable turn start here, and you've got a variable action point system, you can be sitting on your butt doing nothing for 2-3 turns. There was one game where I played, I had a couple of American squads. I'd roll for the first squad, no action. Roll for the second squad, no action. And the way that works is you roll 2 dice for each squad. So in this first platoon, we'll say we're rolling 4. You roll 2 dice for first squad and 2 dice for the second squad. So I'll do first squad first. Well, there you go. That's a miracle. I got 2 action points right there. Usually, though, if you roll, like my rolls are a 5 and a 6, or a 6 and a 6, or whatever you roll, actually it's the morale that determines what your target number is. So in this case, these American units have a 7, which is a veteran. There's 3 levels. You've got 6, which is a rookie, 7, which is a veteran, and 8, which is an elite. I think I've mentioned that before. For a rookie, you need a 1 or a 2. For a veteran, you need a 1 through a 3. And for the elite, you need a 1 through a 4. So what happens if you roll a 5 and a 6? Well, you're hosed. Even if you have an elite unit, you can't move. I've done that plenty of times where I would roll a 5 and a 6, or a 4 and a 6, or a 4 and a 5, and have veteran units, so they can't move. But in this case, I did roll the 2, so I put a marker here, another die, to indicate 2 actions. Now I'm going to roll again for the other squad, and it's only 1 action. So this squad gets, this platoon gets 3 action points. And what happens is this platoon shares it among its squads. So for sake of argument, actually for clarity, I'm going to do this correctly. I think that's the second platoon leader. I might have the wrong one there. But anyway, just to show you how this works, let's just assume that's a 1. My bad for not setting that up correctly. So you got the first platoon leader, first squad, and second squad of first platoon as well. The action points, as I said, are 3, but leaders can actually loan out action points. They start with 2 and can add them to another squad under certain circumstances. For one, the leader has to be within 2 spaces of his commanded squads, and a leader from one platoon cannot give actions to a leader, or cannot give actions to squads from another platoon. So that's a kind of a limiting factor there. So even if you do not get any action points, you still have a base 2 action points that this guy can hand over. But it's still limiting, because as it said in the quick reference sheet, each you can spend 1 action point to get 2 movement points. So let's say I do that. I'll spend 1 point, and I'll move this guy here. Now the thing is, this actually causes possible German activation, and I'll talk about that here in a second, and see how this works. So, you spend 1 action point, move 2 spaces, say spend another action point, move 2 spaces, etc. However you want to do it to move your guys along. It's always a good idea to have an extra action point just in case this activates Germans. When you move a unit, an American unit, from one row of cards into the bottom row, and that's these squares here, of the next row of cards, it can possibly activate German units in this next row. And that's again where the chit pull system comes in. So you put these into a cup and you draw, and if you get a red, then if there's German units assigned still to the scenario, you place them. And then see if they're spotted, and you move on from there and see how the action goes. Another interesting thing about the game is the line of sight rules. They're very simple, and I really appreciate that. There's only a couple of examples in the game that indicate what to do, but there's 2 specific examples that show line of sight through a hill and through a hill if there's a building in the way. Really, there's only 2 things that block line of sight, and that's a building or woods. So in this case, there's no line of sight here because there are woods, as I mentioned in the previous or earlier in the video about how this is kind of a confusing card because there's actually woods here and here. But anyway, there's no line of sight existing because you cannot see that. But if you were, say, having a German unit here, whoops, I think there's a line of sight here, perhaps. You can actually fire through orchards or wheat fields with a die roll modifier. I could be wrong about this spotting through the orchards. It might have to be a certain depth in there. Regardless, it's a very simple concept. If you can see the unit, you can fire at it. And as I said before, when you start the game, if there's no German units on the field, then you're just in a default movement phase. But once you activate some German units, let's say we've got a couple here for the sake of argument, then you begin rounds. And this is another interesting thing about the game that I enjoy greatly, and that is the use of chit pulling to determine how the turn goes. Now, this is not a unique concept because there's war games out there where you put chits into a pool and you draw, and usually it's drawing for certain units, like for example, a certain battalion or a certain platoon or whatever. Then you conduct actions or spend points or move them and fire them, however you want to do it. And then they're done, and then you draw another chit and see that. So some games do that. Some games do variable chit pulls where you can sometimes pull one from one side and pull one from another. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you pull from your side constantly. I don't know. It's just kind of all over the place. But this particular system, I don't remember ever existing before. It could be that I just don't know of a system that has done it. So if there is, please mention something in the comments or in the forums. So what we have here, whoops, that's not even a key there. That's not even a thing. Okay, so anyway, that was in the wrong place. So because, like I said before, there was kind of a problem with me reading the tiles, I put a little dot on the American ones. In this bright light, it's very easy for me to tell the difference between green and gray, but in a less light situation, you might not be able to notice it. So what we have here are 4 phases for each side, plus a separate random event phase. There's F is for fire, A is for advance, R is for rally, M is for movement. So this regulates what you do in a turn. Once units are spotted, once you have German units on the field and you see each other, then you begin what I guess you could call rounds, almost ambush-like is how that works. So you put all of these into a cup, and then you draw from the cup. And I like the ability to be able to just kind of, you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what phase is going to happen or is going to occur. So here we have an advance phase for the Americans, and that means Americans get to move 1 space forward, and then you draw again, and again, and again, and you keep drawing until you until you run out of chits, and then that actually ends the turn. You advance the turn, and then you begin again if units can still spot each other. So there's a fire phase, and you go into fire combat there. I like the variable system. I like how it's different. I like how that you never know what's going to come up. There's also an optional rule for putting more of the gray and red chits into a cup, and you draw from that. And I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's 2 red and 8 gray. And at the end of a phase, you draw from that cup. And if you get a red token, you set it aside and keep playing. And at the end of the next phase, if you draw a red token again, then that's the end of that turn, which is interesting. It keeps you on your toes, too. One of the things I wanted to mention about the manual, as I said, the use of affecting instead of affecting. Square is misspelled here. Calculated is misspelled here. You know, I can understand this once in a while, but when you got stuff so close together, it shows that there might have been a little bit better proofing done, but you know, it is what it is. It's not a big deal, but if this kind of thing drives you nuts, then be prepared. So the spotting rules are pretty clear, but there's something about it that kind of rubbed me the wrong way when I first read it, and that is when you use spotting, or when you're trying to see if a unit is spotted, you roll against their morale, which is the number here on the far right of a counter. So it's not clear in here what unit you're rolling for. I was able to figure it out just through interpretation by reading the rules that, okay, it's the unit that's being spotted that gets to roll, not the unit that is trying to spot. That's a very important distinction to make, and it's not very clear in the rules. So that's one thing. But I do like how that works. The other thing that kind of bugs me about spotting is these question marks here indicate whether a unit is spotted or not. If there's nothing here, then the unit's not spotted. But if it is spotted, then you're supposed to place a marker, I think is what it says, onto there to show that it's spotted. I don't like this. I would much prefer having some kind of marker to actually put on a unit to say, okay, that unit's spotted. Now, the other thing too is, and I understand this is probably done for the sake of playability rather than realism, if one guy spots him, and let's say he's over here, does that mean he spots him too? Let's say you roll, he's spotted. I guess that means, well, it does mean he's spotted by everybody instead of just one unit. I think that would get into levels of complication that are just way overblown, and you don't want to do that. So I like that it's simple like that. I just wish it was a little more clear in the manual. There's another thing about spotting that I really like. It's called ambush. So let's say we've got the Germans here, and they're kind of in this tree line, so there's nothing really between them and the Americans. Let's say we rolled really bad and he's not spotted. So I can't do anything with that. I do know he's there because as a player I see him there, but as an American soldier I do not, so it still kind of affects your play because I would not still go do and keep moving down the road here or the field out in the open, which would happen in reality, I think. But in the game, obviously you're not going to do that. You're probably going to want to go move them over into cover of some kind or keep them where they are and spread out your troops and try to begin to be prepared in case you're going to engage them. So there's something called ambush. So let's say that the German unit has spotted these guys, but nobody spotted the German unit. It's called an ambush situation, and it actually adds firepower to the Germans, and that's kind of a cool little feature that I like as well. And speaking of that, let's get into how fire combat works. And I said near the beginning of the video that you use this number in the far left corner, bottom left corner I should say, as their fire strength, which is again reflected here on their platoon card. That is the number of dice you roll. It's very Axis and Allies, and I kind of like that. I like being able to roll a whole bunch of dice. So if I'm firing at the German unit, I roll all of them. Oops, I didn't roll 6. There we go. And that's actually kind of funny I said that because you need to roll a 6 in order to hit something. And in some circumstances, you just need a 5. But in this case, you need to roll 6. Of course, I have 0 hits here. But there's something additional to that you do. You have the addition of a fire intensity die and a fire regulation die. Now the rules say the fire regulation die should be green. I don't have a green die. I don't think it really matters. As long as it's different from all the other dice, that's okay. So what you do is you roll those two along with your firepower. So now you have a whole mess of dice to roll when you're firing. And again, a 6 is a hit, so we've got 2 hits there. How about that? And then you have to look at your fire regulation die, or fire intensity die rather, and your fire regulation die to determine how much of a morale check that enemy unit takes. Now, you always, as the attacker, want this red die to be higher than the other die. In this case, there's a difference of 3. So that means, barring any modifiers, the German unit you're firing on has to take a morale check with +3. So let's say this German unit is in the open, just for grins. It shouldn't be, because the AI should not move units like that unless he's going for a victory location. So let's say that we're firing on this German unit here. After we've applied all the modifiers, let's just say it's still a +3 just for simplicity's sake. So the German unit has to take a morale check. Again, just for simplicity's sake, you roll 2 dice, and if the result is, that was a 2, if the result is equal to or lower than the unit's morale, then he passes it. In this case, you add 3 to this, so instead of a 3, it's actually a 6, so he just barely passes it. So this fire was extremely effective, as you can see. Now, if you happen to roll a little differently, and that's only a +2, he only takes a morale check at +2. If it's tied, then the enemy unit still takes a morale check, but there's no modifiers. But then there's also the fact that if this morale, or this roll, whoops, that's wrong, 6 and a 1, if it's huge difference, and say after applying modifiers, the result is 5 or higher, then the enemy unit actually breaks and suffers an additional hit in addition to whatever you might happen to hit with your regular hit dice. So that's kind of a cool feature. And if the unit breaks, then there's rules to cover that, as well as rallying. And you can only rally a unit if you draw the R token out of the cup. So there you go. And if you happen to play the in-turn optional rule, where you end the turn early before a rally phase is rolled, then, well, you're kind of hosed. You can't move. Conversely, if this happens to be a 6 and this happens to be a 1, if it's 5 or higher, the difference in this die and this one, it would actually cause one of the hits to be erased, because the fire was pretty bad. Even if you roll 1 6, say, this happens, that's eliminated, and the Germans don't suffer anything. So I like this a lot. This helps. It helps it be something different besides just a bunch of roll to hits like you would say in Axis and Allies. This really adds another random feature to the battle. Some people might not like that, but I enjoyed it greatly. So another thing that I like is opportunity fire. That's something that you would probably ask, is opportunity fire included? Well, yes, it is, because if a unit moves and it's spotted, an enemy unit can fire on it, but it's a free shot. Normally, when you conduct fire, you have to spend an action point to do half your firepower. You spend 2 action points to do full firepower. Let me just double check that and make sure I'm not talking out my ass. Fire, full firepower, 2 actions. Okay, I'm smart. How about that? So as I said, you have to probably save some action points just in case. 1/2 of your firepower is not a lot. So, if you're not rolling 6 dice, you're only rolling 3 plus these 2 fire intensity and fire regulation die. So you better hope you're lucky to roll a 6 there, punk, because it's going to be tough. 6 dice is much better, of course. But again, it sucks up action points. And you need those action points to move, usually as the American. And it's a brilliant balance between needing to move and attain your objectives, combined with trying to fight the Germans. You have to decide really quickly what your priority is, and don't get bogged down in an exchange of fire. I mean, in reality, in a battle, they take all the time in the world. They probably wouldn't rush. I mean, I don't know. Let's say the circumstances are they need to get off the map edge because there's artillery up here that's decimating the Allies' landing on, or let's say Omaha Beach. So the parachute troops need to get there and destroy it, just like they did in Band of Brothers. If you saw that, you saw the story about how that happened, or a raid on a particular artillery park. So let's say there's that. So, there's some impetus to actually get these guys off the map before the end of the game, or game turns. So there's an impetus to get off the map as soon as possible, especially as you're running out of time over here. But you also can't just ignore Germans. I mean, you just see if you're trying to get these units off the north edge of the map and you got Germans, say, hold up in these trees, well, you've got open space here. So you do that, you better have a lot of action points to move your guy. And when you do that, say you spend 2 action points to move 4 spaces, That's hazardous move, so they get a die roll modifier to their fire intensity die, which is bad for the Americans. If even if they miss all their hit rolls, you still have this morale check to make, and if they fail it, hey, they're going to break and they're going to run away. So that kind of messes up your strategy even more. I love this. I love the way this works. I love the way it rolls. It's a wonderful little combat system. So another thing that I should mention, when you're looking at the rules, you've got this sequence of play here where you have, as I showed you before, the markers, and it explains the markers, but it goes right into actions and action points. What it really should do, I think, is go 4.1 advanced phase, 4.2 movement phase, 4.3 fire, 4.4 rally, 4.5 random events, to keep it simple so you can find stuff. And the thing is, notice this is section 4.0. I have to go to section 10.0 to look at movement, 11 for advance, and then 12 for combat. So, it's kind of mixed up everywhere, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. But, like I said, it should be better organized. Another thing, as I said with the routing before, I mentioned that earlier. You can see here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 instances of how it's misspelled. That just kind of drove me batty, just having it in this short little section here. If that doesn't bother you, don't worry about it. No biggie, but, still. Let's see. Oh, here's another thing. The rallying... The thing that I told you about with rolling the fire intensity and fire regulation die and having to take morale checks, the rules don't specifically say to roll for a morale check right at that moment, unless I've totally missed something, which is possible. But it doesn't say specifically roll 2 dice like it does here. This is just about rallying. Roll 2 dice. If the number rolled is equal to or less than the unit's morale number after DR mods, the unit recovers, flip the unit back over. So it doesn't say, at least I didn't see, and I totally could have missed it, to roll 2 dice. And if the number rolled to is equal or less than the unit's morale number after DR mods, the unit is fine. It passed its morale check, and you just move on. I don't know. So that's another thing that kind of bugged me. But again, this could be me and not the manual at all. The other thing that I want to mention is, you'll see here, optional rules 23, and one of the optional rules is AI, which doesn't make sense. I think this should be part of the rules, and there's a nice playthrough on Board Game Geek for Scenario 3, I think it is. If you want to get a feel for how the game flows, go check that out. I wish I could I'll see if I can put a link in the description. One of the guys in the forums, I believe it was Barthhart, mentioned this link, and it was greatly helpful to help me figure things out. But the way that guy followed it is he talked about these rules here as part of the regular rules and never mentioned it as an option. So this should not be under the optional rules section. This tells you how Germans activate depending on which token is drawn. There's some things that are a little discrepancy, like scooting eligibility. It's okay, I get it's movement eligibility because over here it says shooting eligibility. But scooting, if you see that as a wargamer, especially if you're old school, Avalon Hill guy, you're going to be looking at this and going, okay, what did I miss? Activate a certain paragraph of rules. It's just talking about movement. So this kind of threw me off a little bit. I think it needs to be a little more simple and eliminate that and just say movement phase, eligibility, fire phase, eligibility. Simple as that. But I do like how this is laid out. This proves and shows you how this game is really for one player. There is a 2-player variant, though, in the optional rules. So if you want to play 2-player, you can. But generally speaking, this is a really nice flow to it, to how German units move and behave. Each scenario will tell you if they're on an offensive or defensive stance, so that tells you too some more about what they do. If they're on a defensive stance, they want to move to VP locations. If they're on offensive, they want to do this, that kind of thing. That's really nice. I like how that regulates things. There's also rules in here for building your own scenarios, which is great. There's only 8 scenarios in the game, but man, I mean, you could create anything you want out of this. You can really do anything with this system, which is awesome. One other thing that I wanted to mention here really quick, or actually 2 more things. One is a quibble, and that's this victory points section. This victory is mentioned near the beginning of the manual, but it doesn't tell you, or victory points are mentioned, but it doesn't tell you how to get victory points. And that's fine, but it should be part of the table of contents, I think. So these sections, subsections should be numbered, so they go into the TOC at the start of the manual to make it easier to find rules. In this case, I thought about it the whole time I'm reading it, and then boom, here it is. Okay, great, that's wonderful. So again, minor point, but better organization would made this a lot easier to find. Next, and finally, we have the campaign game. I like this because it's very flexible. It says you get to decide how many scenarios your campaign will comprise. So you can play all 8, you can play 2, it's whatever you want to do. What makes it neat is, before starting a campaign, you must pre-designate one of the first platoon leader as yourself. So you play as you, and you get to be in the game. And each successive scenario, you replace that first platoon leader with you. So at the end of each scenario, as long as you didn't die, hopefully, for every 24 victory points you earn, you get 1 rank promotion. And there are blank leader counters, or not blank, but there are leader counters to represent this. So, you can, as any of these ranks. Then also you can get medals. So you gain points to compare to this list here according to these rules, and you can get things like the Bronze Star, Silver Star, Congressional Medal of Honor even. I like this a lot. I like how this adds a little bit more flavor to it. I've always enjoyed this kind of thing in, say, one of the solitaire B-17 games, as additional rules. I don't think Queen of the Skies actually had something like this, but people create things like that all the time. This is really cool. I like this. So some final thoughts on the game. As I said, I wasn't really complaining. I was just pointing out that I've got issues with the rule book. I was probably the wrong person to be reviewing this, because from my background and from what I've done in the past, this could be a lot better. And that's just my opinion. You guys out there who have played it already might disagree, and that's perfectly fine. I have no problem. I mean, as I said, typos aren't that big of a deal. Some people really get their panties in a wad over it. Others just, whatever. I don't care. So be that as it may, if it's something that bugs you, you're probably going to struggle with the rule book. That's not to say don't get this game because of that. This can be slogged through. I've done it. It's not hard once you kind of get those light bulb moments. You read through it, you don't understand it, you maybe put a few tiles down and start pushing the counters around and go, oh, I get it. Okay, that makes sense now. That's the best way to do this game. This is a labor of love, obviously, from the designer. If you've watched his videos on YouTube, you can see how it went through a growth, how he just poured his talent and his love for the game into this, and that's to be greatly appreciated. So I'm not disparaging this game at all. It's a lot of fun. It does some cool things. It does the fire dice. It does the fire intensity and the fire regulation dice. I really love that. I love that the line of sight rules are very simple. I love that the time track is variable. There's so many things to love about this game that far outbalance any of the issues that it might have. Now, as I said, this company has done many other games. The Platoon Leader is one of them, and that has several expansions. So obviously they're doing something right. Again, this is the first game that I've ever reviewed of theirs. Hopefully not the last. We'll see how that goes. I make bad jokes sometimes. This is a good game. As I said, it's $10 for the print and play. So obviously $10 for that. Then whatever it costs you to print stuff out, I recommend you go to a Kinko's or a Office Max and have them do it professionally on stock, good stock paper. But if you're a DIY kind of person, by all means. Some people find it cathartic to go through and cut things out, and I kind of found that enjoyable. But it took me a while. It took me almost a week to get everything out and done. So overall, I do recommend this game. I think it's excellent. I think that we have to support indie developers as well, because they have great ideas, as this guy does. And I think this is definitely a thumbs up. So go out there, check out the website. We've got the link in the description. Go into the GrogHeads forums. If you have thoughts on this game after you purchase it, or if you've played it, please share them with us. And I want to thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.